Hello, Alex here, and in this video I want to talk about the TTArtisan 100mm f2.8 bubble bokeh lens, a creative effect lens derived from one of the original Meyer Optic Görlitz designs from the trioplan lineup that is not just a one-trick pony. Let's get into it. I'll always be transparent about this kind of thing, but after dealing with TTArtisan before when reviewing the 75mm f1.5, they reached out again to see if I'd be interested in looking at this lens and agreed to send me this copy for review in exchange for me getting to keep it. And I did specifically request a copy of the lens in Leica M mount, not M42 mount, as I'll talk about briefly. And there are links to the TTArtisan store down below, and they are affiliate referral links, and I'll get a small commission and kickback from those if you buy this lens or anything else on the TTArtisan store using those links. They also sent me a copy of version 2 of their TTArtisan light meter, which I've really enjoyed using, but I'll be talking about another time. Much like the TTArtisan 75mm f1.5 based on the Carl Zeiss Sienna Biotard design that I spoke about before, I want to start this video by giving some optical context and history behind this lens to kind of understand the significance of the trioplan or trioplan lineup. One of the most fundamental and important innovations and designs in optical history was the Cooke triplet, with just 3 elements, first designed in 1893, offering high correction of the 5 seedal aberrations in the center of the frame, but also right out to the edges, which was quite novel at the time, especially with just 3 elements. In 1916, Hugo Meyer later designed the trioplan or trioplan formula, another triplet design, but this time maintaining that high correction of all of the main aberrations from the center to the edge of the frame with high center sharpness and resolution, and also a fast maximum aperture. Following on from World War II, the range of trioplan lenses were the bread and butter of the Meyer Optic Görlitz company, ranging to at least an ultra-large format 360mm lens and probably others that I haven't found any reference to. And they all had one distinct common trait, at least in their image quality. That being very strong, highly defined edges around out-of-focus specular highlights, which is the origin of the term soap bubble bokeh, which is what TTArtisan have decided to call their recreation of the 100mm f2.8 from that lineup. I don't understand exactly how this works and how the edges are formed in your images, but I do know that this is caused by excessive overcorrection of spherical aberration in the optical design of the lens, which for the time was probably technically very impressive. This is far from a feature that's unique to the trioplan lens lineup though, because these Leica steel rim Summilux or the Voigtlander Nocton 35mm f1.4 I have exhibit strong kind of rings around the out of focus highlights as well, strong soap bubble bokeh, at least when shooting wide open. And like I said, TTArtisan have replicated the 100mm f2.8 from the trioplan lineup, making it available, the guts of 100 years later for a modern audience with modern manufacturing and quality control techniques. Inside the box, you get a warranty card, a focus calibration chart, which can be used to recalibrate the rangefinder coupling if you need to with your specific copy of the lens, and I'll come back to this later. A screwdriver for the focus calibration, and the lens itself with a metal screw in front cap and a high quality rear cap. The lens is about 60mm wide at the mount, tapering down slightly towards the front. It's 98mm long, at least as measured from the mount, and extends by another 15 or so millimeters on close focusing, so it is quite a long and narrow lens, and it weighs just 385 grams, so it isn't particularly dense in spite of the size, and it handles quite nicely in the hand. The lens is completely made of metal, from the filter threads to the barrel, the focus and aperture rings, and of course the lens mount. This is a prime lens, so it doesn't zoom and it has a fixed focal length of 100mm, a decent telephoto field of view that offers significant separation of your subject from the background while not having you work at completely unreasonable distances like something like a 200 or 300mm lens would, while getting you most of the look. I know a lot of people enjoy using like a 300 f2.8 for portraiture, but a 100 to 135-ish mil lens is a very popular kind of highly compressed, decently far away focal length for portraiture for a reason. It's not a focal length I am personally particularly a huge fan of. I would much rather shoot with like a 75, as I rambled about in that previous video, or something much longer like a 180 or a 200. But that's just the way I kind of prefer to shoot. The 100, 105mm kind of range is extremely popular for very good reason. This TTArtisan lens is available in both the M42 screw mount for 155 USD, or like I said, the Leica M mount for 210 USD. And the higher cost comes from the fact that this is fully rangefinder coupled with a proper rangefinder cam from infinity down to the minimum focusing distance of 0.9 meters, 90 centimeters. That gives you a max reproduction ratio of 1:8 or a max magnification of 0.12x. Not super close, but in the rangefinder world, completely normal and expected, and it is the same minimum focusing distance across both mounts. I should say here that some of my images taken with this lens on my Sony were shot with this helicoid adapter where I can get the lens a little bit closer, so those aren't necessarily as close as you're going to get in your own images. The front of the lens bears a 49mm filter thread and the aperture diaphragm is right up there at the front. The aperture range starts at f2.8 and closes down to f11 in half-stop clicks and then in whole-stop clicks to f22. Unlike most lenses, the number scale actually stays still and the indicator moves, which did catch me off guard, but since the aperture range is also in the reverse order from what I would expect from like an M mount, that means when going by muscle memory, you're going in the right direction, so it's not too bad. And though I did complain about the kind of mushy feeling of the aperture ring in conjunction with the non-equidistant or unequally spaced aperture markings on the 75mm f1.5, there's very strong tactile feedback here with this lens, so I'm much more kind of willing to put up with it, for lack of a better word. The metal focusing ring is scalloped with engraved markings in both metric and imperial, and it bears a surprisingly broad depth of field scale for a lens of this focal length. And this is because the focusing ring actually turns a full 180 degrees from infinity down to the minimum focusing distance, far more than the typical 90 or so degrees you would expect to see with a Leica M mount lens. And that is fantastic given the high precision that you're going to need to focus this lens certainly wide open. The rear of the lens has, in this case, the Leica M mount, making it natively compatible with any M mount camera, either film or digital, or any mirrorless camera with the relevant adapter. The M42 screw mount version of the lens can also be adapted to any mirrorless camera, but also most SLR mounts, with the notable exception of the Nikon F mount. When you attach this lens to your Leica M mount camera, it will engage the frameline selector in position 3, giving most of you 90mm frame lines, or in my case, 85mm. And finally, the optical design. It's a true trioplan lens with just 3 elements in 3 groups. And in a world where we're talking about primes with 20 or more elements in some cases, it kind of boggles the mind that you can get such high image quality, especially when stopped down. I don't normally show MTF charts in my videos, but I do want to put the MTF chart up here to show, what was possible over 100 years ago with like manual pen on paper or pencil on paper calculations to work out the optical parameters to make this work. I just find this stuff absolutely fascinating. This lens is very affordable, which is very important for such a creative effect lens. Back in the day when, there weren't many options to choose from, you'd put up with the soap bubble bokeh if you didn't like it, if it meant getting your high center sharpness and high correction of the other aberrations across the frame. Nowadays, you can pick up a very technically high quality optic for a couple of €100 for basically any mount, no problem. So the fact that this is just like 155 USD in M42 mount or about 200 in M mount is very impressive. When you consider that Meyer Optic Görlitz are still around and manufacturing their own copies of the trioplan lenses, and this 100mm f2.8 from them sells for about €1,000, though it is natively available in many more mounts, including Nikon F mount, that's 6 to 8 times the price, and there are actually many reports that this TTArtisan lens has significantly better build quality than that. So given the relatively limited utility for some people in the modern day, the low price is incredible, both in terms of being affordable, but the value proposition is a lot higher when you're not kind of risking as much money for a lens you maybe wouldn't like to use all of the time. And on that note, yes, the build quality is absolutely fantastic. It's all metal, it's really solid, and there's nothing really wobbling. I will say that one thing I didn't have to do was calibrate the rangefinder, like I said, but the ability to do it at all is really impressive. There are guides included in the box and video tutorials online, so I won't be explaining this in this video, but if the infinity calibration or any of the general rangefinder performance with this lens is slightly off for you, you can just tweak it to get it just right. Or if your camera, say you're using this like on an M10R or an M11, where you can really see even the slightest miscalibration, you can really dial this lens in to match your own lens. When stopped down, the lens is very sharp across the frame, and one of the things I've enjoyed using it for has been that kind of long distance compressed landscape photography, like for sunsets and the like, because the image quality even on the 61 megapixel Sony a7 R4A is very, very impressive, even from just like f5.6, f8. If you're looking for an original copy of the 100mm trioplan, you're going to be looking at about 250 to 400 euros on eBay, depending on condition. And condition is a big thing there. You're talking about scratches on the front and rear elements, cosmetic damage to the barrel, which does matter to a lot of people, fungus, haze, damage to the aperture mechanism, and none of these are problems with a brand new lens that comes with warranty support. So not only is this lens actually cheaper and arguably significantly better manufactured, and it's going to be in better condition mechanically as well as optically, you have the warranty support to back you up in case you do encounter any issues down the line. That's not something you're going to have when you're looking at the originals. Like I said, the minimum focusing distance of 0.9 meters is shared between the M mount and M42 mount versions of this lens, and it's not that great in an objective sense, but on the M mount side, I want to give you context to explain why it's so impressive as far as these lenses go. Most 90 or so millimeter lenses in M mount go no closer than 1 meter, and I only know of 2 examples that go closer. Those being the significantly more expensive, like a 90mm macro Elmar f4, which focuses down to 77 centimeters without the adapter, and the Keepon Ibrid 90mm f2.4, which focuses down to a very impressive 0.7 meters, the closest focusing long lens I'm aware of in the Leica M mount. So 0.9 meters for a 100mm lens is actually very impressive in context. And like I said, the rangefinder calibration in my experience has been absolutely fantastic, with a caveat that I'll come back to later. By the standards of someone who primarily shoots on film and actively avoids, 20 plus element modern ultra clinical perfect lenses with smooth everything and no coma and no aberrations whatsoever, with all that kind of context, I do really like the look that this lens gives. Not all of the time, but you do have a lot of control over it. The soap bubble effect is kind of strongest around f2.8 to f4 at around 1.2 to 1.8 meters, 4 to 6 feet, depending on the distance between your subject and the background. But outside that range, from f4 to f5.6 onwards, and at very close distances where the bokeh balls get so large they overlap, or very far away where they're just not that pronounced to begin with, the soap bubble effect really tones down and it just becomes a bit more of an aesthetically pleasing lens with a bit more character. So you have a lot more versatility than you're going to have with some other lenses. And of course, if you stop it way down to like f11, that's going to kind of nullify your out of focus background blur, especially when shooting at far distances. And it just performs as a very well behaved lens, like I said earlier, with high sharpness and high image quality across the frame anyway. I think the decision from TTArtisans to manufacture this lens in just 2 mounts, like M and M42, was a very smart one, because it simplifies manufacturing and logistics tremendously, enabling them to just stock 2 SKUs and a bunch of adapters to use them on pretty much every other mount that you would reasonably want to use. And also for a creative effect lens like this, where a lot of people would buy this to use it occasionally, where the low price comes in very appealingly, being able to buy it in an adaptable mount means you could buy this lens once and buy a couple of different adapters to use it on different cameras, giving you more utility out of it rather than having to commit to buying multiple copies of the same lens in multiple different mounts. I don't think it's unreasonable or unfair to say that this lens has a somewhat limited use case. It's not a lens you can use for everything all the time, especially given the focal length, and for a lot of people the look isn't something they may necessarily enjoy. But I've showed that by playing around with your distance to your subject and also with the aperture that you select, and I've got a comparison here, you can really tone down that effect and tweak the image quality so you can get some of the look without going too overboard all the time. But, if you want a high quality modern optic, you shouldn't be looking at a lens design from over 100 years ago anyway. Resistance to flaring is a weakness of this design, and it's really hit or miss here. It really only takes the slightest bit of sun poking through in a backlit situation to really cut and kill your contrast. But at least it is mostly just a drastic loss in contrast and veiling flare, rather than weird artifacts and blobs appearing all over your image, which I would find arguably more distracting. You can kind of extract contrast back in post with your digital files or when printing or scanning your or your film negatives. Flare is a bit difficult to work with when you're working with a rangefinder camera because you're not shooting through the lens and you can't see it. When I'm using the Sony, yeah, I can just tweak myself and move around and till the flare effect is not minimized, but until I've got it where I like it. I can't do that with the Leica M mount version of the lens because I don't know what the camera or the film itself is actually going to see. When I first received this lens, the focus ring turned extremely heavily to the point that I wasn't able to do this with one hand. And that meant that when I attached it to my Zeiss Icon, when I was actually trying to focus the rangefinder, the entire lens barrel would move. And that would partially disengage the frameline selection mechanism, giving me not just my 85mm frame lines, but a ghostly overlap of partially engaged 50 and partially overlaid 85mm frame lines, which was a bit rough to see in the viewfinder. It didn't affect the rangefinder calibration or the coupling in any way, and the focus was still correct according to the patch, but it did make framing a bit difficult at times when I was trying to, really get critical focus and the frame lines were jiggling in and out of existence. Though this has pretty much resolved itself in the last while as the focus ring has loosened up. Like I said, it's not a nice grip, but I can do this one-handed now where I wasn't able to do that before. So you may need to break in your copy of the lens, and this might be something specific to the Zeiss Icon given its implementation of the ZM mount. I haven't checked this on an actual Leica M camera, but if you do experience something like that, just spend some time watching TV, wiggling the focus ring back and forth to get that grease moving, and it'll loosen up over time. Something that does matter with rangefinder focusing is that a 100mm f2.8 gives you very, very shallow depth of field, and critical focusing is very difficult. Any shot where I have really taken my time and done it properly has been absolutely perfect, and I've been very grateful for the very bright and clear viewfinder and rangefinder patch on my Zeiss. But anything where I was kind of winging it or thinking, yeah, it's probably close enough, it wasn't in focus. You have to really be on the ball with such a fast, long focal length lens with a rangefinder, and that's going to take a bit more skill and patience than some people might be used to. Actual vignetting and darkening of the image is not something you're going to see with this lens design. It performs very well in that regard, but the Leica M mount implementation of this lens suffers in a very bad way. The rear element of this lens design is about here. And this is just a tube, basically, a spacer to get the correct back focus distance as well as to have the mount. But the Leica M mount being so small means the image circle is completely truncated and you do get black corners. Whether I'm adapting it to the Sony or using it natively on the Zeiss, I am not getting the full image frame completely illuminated because the barrel at the back of the lens physically gets in the way because this mount is so narrow. The M42 copy of the lens does not have this problem, and this is completely fully disclosed on the TTArtisan website with sample images, but I have some of my own sample images here at various distances and apertures to show you what this effect looks like, and it does mean that you're going to have to crop in every single image with the M mount version of this lens just a little bit, bringing you more to like a 110mm kind of field of view, which may be a deal breaker for some people if 100mm was already kind of on the cusp of how long you were willing to go. And lastly, I don't consider this a con, but I'm mentioning it here just because it's where people would look for this information in my videos. You're not going to have 100mm frame lines on your camera. The best case is you're going to have 90mm frame lines, but that is okay. Rangefinders are inherently a suggestion and just an approximation of the composition, and even then, the size of the frame lines matching the field of view of the lens, they're only technically calibrated at one specific distance, usually about 2 meters. Further away, you're usually going to capture more than the frame lines tell you. Closer up, you're going to capture less, a more zoomed in field of view, just because of focus breathing with these lens designs. 90mm frame lines are not going to be a problem to compose with this lens. I've been using 85mm frame lines without issue, so you can use 90 no problem. So those are my thoughts on the TTArtisan 100mm f2.8 bubble bokeh lens, the modern recreation of the 100mm f2.8 trioplan. This isn't a lens that I would typically gravitate towards myself, being a focal length that I'm not super interested in most of the time, but it's a lens I've really enjoyed using, especially for my floral photography. I'm not really interested in focus stacking when I photograph flowers. I try to get just close up and enjoy a nice, smooth, out of focus background. But sometimes, if there's nothing physically there, it's just a void behind the subject. At those kind of distances, it just blurs into absolute nothing. And a lens like this will add a bit more character into the out of focus areas, with even small highlights giving a bit of texture that I kind of appreciate in a lot of these images. There is a lot of strong glow with this lens when shooting wide open, and at very far distances, it's not something I super enjoy, but at close distances, it really behaves very nicely. 4 meters and beyond for full body portraits, it's not a lens I would really go for wide open, stop down, sure, but at close distances, oh, this thing is just a gorgeous joy to use. And the fact that, like the 75mm, this is a modern recreation of an older lens design, making it available for the masses with modern manufacturing and a strong warranty from a reputable company backing it up, that makes it a lot more accessible. And the fact that the price is so good, again, 155 or 210 USD, it's a lens that it's much more easy to justify just giving a go in case you like it and having it around to use sometimes. For most people, I would recommend steering away from the Leica M-mount version of the lens unless you specifically want to use this on a rangefinder camera. If I were just using this on the Sony, I would have bought the M42 version of the lens, because then you don't have to worry about the truncated image circle because of Leica's design of the M-mount. That's not TTArtisan's fault. That's just the nature of this long lens with that lens mount. There's nothing that can be done about that, but I praise TTArtisan for their strong transparency about that on the webpage. Otherwise, the lens has just been really fun to use. The build quality is great. I really enjoyed the images I've gotten with it, and it's made me use a focal length that I wouldn't normally gravitate towards. You know, I have my 90mm f2 in Leica M mount. I don't like using that lens at all. The background blur is really smooth, sure. There's a bit of glow when shooting wide open, sure. But it has no real character or pizzazz to make me want to shoot it, where going forward, if I want to use a long focal length lens, I'm going to use this one because I get the glow and the characterful bokeh when I'm shooting wide open, and when I want to stop down for like a very flat landscape, like a sunset kind of thing, I can do that just as easily and get very, very high image quality that impressed me even on my 60 megapixel digital camera. Again, if you want to pick up this lens or anything else from TTArtisan, links to their store will be in the video description down below, and I will get some kind of commission kickback from that. So thank you very much to TTArtisan for making this video happen. But that's all I have to say for today, so stay safe, and bye-bye for now. If you don't already, follow me on Instagram at Shaka1277 for new pictures every day. If you liked this video and enjoy what I do on the channel, please consider subscribing or checking out my Patreon, where the tiers start at just €1 per month.